Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Human SOS show. My partner's back, Anton, seems to be doing better. Glad to have him on board. Last week was, I missed him a lot, so glad to have him back. And then I'm going to have Anton introduce our guest. Just a reminder that if you would, let us know in the comments where you're joining from geographically. And then please be sure to add your thoughts and questions in the comments as we go along so that we can engage and discuss. And so, Anton, you want to take it away and introduce our guest?
Yeah, I'm very excited to have Virg. Virg and me go way back. We met actually back when I worked for Lifetime, and Virg did like a big health transformation, and then he ended up being my professor at school. So that was really, really cool and neat. But he's a certified executive coach, organizational consultant, and a management instructor. He's the president and executive coach with Performance Point Solutions, LLC. Additionally, he serves as an executive coach and consultant for Resnick Partners, Lehigh Harrison, and Black Swan. He's on the adjunct faculty of the University of Colorado, Denver in the business school and the faculty of the Institute for Social and Emotional Intelligence, instructing coaching certification to coaches. So, Virg, you've been doing this for a long time, man. How are you?
Good, very good. Yes, I have been doing it for a while. Absolutely.
No,
Yeah.
it's funny. Whenever I had a performance question, I'd reach out to Virg. I'm like, send me your stuff. So he wrote this really good article that explains. I think you make them 13 principles of performance management now. But I refer to that often still. After I don't know, it's been like 3 years since I've been out of school with you. But yeah, man. So talk to me about performance management. One of the things that I remember really well, and it stuck to me, and you're going to say you don't have the data for it, but obviously from experience, is that traditional performance management is dead, and it causes more problems than it does good, and we should be using agile performance management.
Yeah, without question. And, with my 35 years in business and then another 14 in my coaching work and my teaching work, and having a lot of interaction with companies and leaders, I've seen that whole performance approach change and over all those years, and had personal experience with it as a leader and manager. Also from an HR perspective when I was in those kinds of roles, and I've seen it evolve in many ways. But one of the things that I've really found over time was how the more traditional approaches, the systems, if you will, that some companies put in place, um, actually work against building effective performance. Many times they're very uh, non people oriented, if you will. You don't have the same connection as necessary between manager and employee to really make a difference. And so I've really seen that evolve. And also, as you were making reference to, Anton, is so many of those systems, in effect, are failing. Companies get frustrated, their leadership does, because performance isn't what they want it to be or need to be, but yet the approach they take kind of keeps it in place as it is. And so over time, what I did, and you made reference to this article that I've written, the 13 Essentials of High Performance, it became clear to me over time some of those key elements that were necessary and I had experience with and demonstrated success with, where performance could be changed and improved. And I'm a strong believer in that. Performance management, in a way, has a bad reputation. And you ask any employee or manager, and they just, oh, I hate it. We do it annually. It's this kind of thing. And yet it's not effective. So the emphasis I place with students and with leaders I work with is the importance of taking a different approach from what they've done traditionally. And I say to them, regardless of the system you have in place, because changing systems within a company isn't, as you gentlemen know and others know, is not so easy to do. But that doesn't mean that you can't work within that system and apply many of the principles that I advocate and really truly make a difference in individuals' performance. So as you can tell, I have a strong passion about it, but I believe in it. I've seen it. I know that individuals can improve and change in terms of performance, but if it's done just from a systematic point of view, it probably isn't going to happen.
Let me give a shout out. We've got a couple of our regulars that have joined us today. Suzette, glad to have you. Sharon, glad to hear from you, and appreciate y'all being on. And just feel free to jump in with questions, comments as we go along.
So just high level, I mean, some of our folks may be not familiar with terms agile performance management or traditional performance management. What are some of these major differences between the two, Virg?
Oh, great question. Well, in terms of traditional, it's usually in some systematic way where performance is handled over typically a year. Sometimes it's different time frames, but the performance plan, if you will, the performance expectations at the start of a performance year are somewhat defined, and in other instances, I've seen them poorly defined. In some cases, I've seen managers take the approach, well, employees, you can select what you want to work on during the year. It's kind of, which oftentimes is misaligned with what the company needs to achieve, or the business unit. And so setting expectations, if they're in if they have a manager that is at least somewhat concerned, that manager will give guidance and feedback to their employee during the year and help them. And then end of the year, there's a formal performance appraisal, if you will. And there's all kinds of different numeric systems and others rating them. Unfortunately, sometimes you see combining performance with development, and that kind of confuses the situation in individuals. So that's kind of a traditional approach. An agile approach, it really is ongoing feedback. And I cannot emphasize enough, in terms of my 13 essentials that I've talked about, and in terms of what really works for agile and I will say effective performance management, is frequent ongoing feedback between manager and employee. That communication is really critical. Now, to do that, you need more than just the conversation. I think you need a strong partnership between the employee and the manager, a clear understanding between the two of them, that performance expectation, job clarity to start with, where the job is well defined, and then performance expectations for that job are clearly laid out for that given period of time, for the next quarter, for the next year, whatever. And we have to face it, gentlemen, today, and ladies, our world is constantly changing. And so with a company and in most any business, setting performance expectations now for the whole year is kind of crazy, because that world that is going to be changing in a few months or more. And so again, having that manager in close communication with their employee in a way that is open, they're transparent, and they can make changes as necessary. That is a critical element of being agile. It is going, we said, we were kidding a little bit earlier before we started about going with the flow. And in many ways, that's what this boils down to between manager and employee. So that expectations, as an employee, you know what's expected, but you're getting feedback as you're moving through your performance to make adjustments. That helps you then become a better performer.
Need to shout out a couple of more folks who joined us. Rafia from Canada. Rafia's been on before, and of course Zaid's a regular. So welcome. Glad to have you guys on board. Be sure and and Lee, glad to have you as well. Be sure and throw out questions, comments as we go along.
Absolutely. I'll be glad to take any questions about any aspect of this, and I can probably make some other comments if you like.
I think that everything you're saying is a great way to split them up. And I think that when people sit down and think about it, like, okay, frequent feedback, that makes sense. Why, it's better for me to learn from something I did yesterday than something from that I did 9 months ago. And now I'm finally, being told what I'm doing wrong. And it's funny because it makes me think about coaching right now, like coaching for kids. And I coach a soccer team, and I stepped out so I can, get a new job, do all that. And there's another coach that stepped in, and the parents are getting mad because they're like, well, this new coach is more like the traditional performance manager, right? Doesn't really do much during the game. Then when the game is over, comes in and gives feedback, at the end, and players are trying to remember it. Well, I was always like really involved. As soon as they did something, I was like, okay, this is what's going on. This is what's going on. What can you do better? So that's not just in business. That stuff exists everywhere. But I saw a stat that said 69% of companies still use traditional performance management. That's the last stat on it that I saw. Why do you think that we're still stuck in those kind of, prehistoric years, as we would say?
Yeah, I agree with you on the stat. It's somewhere is always around 70%, and it's true. And making change is not easy. Companies sometimes have invested, if you will, in that, and their culture has built around it, particularly the leadership. Because if the leadership isn't willing to do something different, it's probably not going to change. And unfortunately, I've seen that over and over again, and I've actually worked in a company or companies that it seems for many of us, it was obvious we needed to change how we approach that. Yet leadership was unwilling to do that. So I don't really know that answer, Anton, as to why that's in place. What I did over time in a couple companies I was with was work to help my leadership see that a different approach could produce different results. And in a couple instances, I remember one particularly, I said, let's do this on a pilot basis with one of our business units. And we did that for a year in that business unit. And then they could start to see the management of that business unit, as well as the rest of the leadership, how a different approach could produce different results. And then we were able to expand that to the company. So it takes getting buy-in from that leadership many times, and it's not an easy thing to do, but it is possible. It absolutely is.
If Virg, I'm curious. Good to know that you had a kind of a comparison. You had the introduction to Agile, while within the same company you had the old style. What kind of comparative results did you see?
Well, we did a couple things. Trying to think back exactly, but one was we. The company had in the old system, they had it included a rating system, if you will, which I'm not really a big proponent of, but they did have a rating system. And so they had all that data collected, because the rating system also, and oftentimes is a case, drives compensation.
Mm-hmm.
It drives merit increases.
Right.
Companies set it up that way. And so the data was there to see that. And then we were able to generate data a little bit different way, but still could compare so that they could see we really had an improvement in performance. And the second thing we did was we solicited input from both the managers and the employees about what they saw in this new approach versus the old approach. And it was quite significantly different in terms of a more positive, certainly coming from the employees. We had some managers that really loved it and bought into it. And I'll be candid with you, we also had some managers that were still resisting. They wanted to go back to the old way, which isn't unusual. I mean, it's.
What was the resistant managers? What was their objection?
That's a great question. I think, as I recall, mostly it was they felt they didn't have time, or at least they said, I don't have time to do this. I don't have time to spend more time with my employee, to give them what you talked about, Anton, earlier on the soccer field, was you were giving what I would label as in the moment feedback. the end of it, the player comes off the field, you're not beating him up or her up. You are helping them understand what they just did and what they might do differently and give them some guidance on that. That's in the moment feedback, and that's where the greatest learning occurs because you can relate directly to it. On the job, of course, maybe that's not always as easy to do because the manager is not always present with every employee in every instance of what's going on, but they can still, over time, do a better job. And I found that to be true. It took some work to, if you will, coach and prepare the managers, maybe more so than the employees, to take a different approach.
Well, we have a comment. This is Suzette. I apologize, Suzette, for your showing up as LinkedIn user. In fact, there are 3 of you today that are LinkedIn users, so I'll do my best to keep it straight. But Suzette says, I have to be very frank, but I agree. A form and style of a leader is inculcated within the culture, but there are heads of HR who are to provide advice to leaders. So I believe it's a lazy approach. Sorry, had to say it, by HR professionals. It's easy for them to be gravely ineffective. And I believe she's referring to the older style of performance management in that.
Well, I can comment on that. And I agree with her 100%. In addition to a lot of things I teach, and Anto knows this, I teach an HR course also. And in that course, one of the first things I say at the outset of that class, as we get into it, maybe the first week or two, we talk about the role of HR. And I have it segmented basically into 2 kind of mindsets. The how we can mindset and the why we can't mindset.
Okay.
And unfortunately, and she's nailed it here, Suzanne or Suzette has nailed it in that there is still many HR functions by HR leaders that take this more compliance approach and how we can't do things and why we can't do things as opposed to how we can. And so, yeah, that is an internal barrier many times with an organization, is the very group that should be advocating for a different and better approach sometimes are the resistors.
I learned that in your class, Virg, and it's stuck in my head. And now what I talk about is I say there's 2 sides to it. It's either one is HR is a compliance department or HR is a human potential department, right? And one, we're chasing the positive, and another one, we're running from a negative.
Yeah, you got it. Absolutely right way to state it.
And
I think there's another comment from Lee. Yeah.
Lee's got a question. He said, should managers wait until performance review time to give constructive criticism or on a regular basis closer to the behavior?
Well, it doesn't matter whether it's on the constructive side or the very positive side. It should be ongoing and timely. And in fact, I think it's a mistake to wait. If during the course of the year you're giving where there's appropriate positive and you're holding off on what you would label as constructive or oftentimes labeled as criticism, that's a mistake. And let's look at it this way. It's not about just giving the feedback that's constructive. It's about helping the individual see how doing something different or taking a different approach is going to be more effective. It's about learning. And so that immediate ongoing feedback between manager and employee is really pretty critical. It's essential, I think.
And as we were talking about feedback, I think the problem is that I would say the problem with one caveat, right? As long as the manager knows how to deliver feedback, because I can imagine some of those managers that are coming in and they are trying to be agile and trying to give frequent feedback, but it's so disruptive that maybe it's for some of these folks, it's best they save it for once a year.
Well, okay. Yeah, I guess that's true. But so let me talk a little bit about feedback, because this is an important point that probably addresses this. And that is, it also has to do with, and I make reference to this in my article, managing your emotional intensity. And so the manager, in every instance, as a manager, in giving feedback or basically in almost every interaction, managing your emotional intensity, basically controlling your behavior, and that includes the language you use, to use more nourishing language versus depleting language, language that helps build confidence, helps build their self-esteem, helps build their competence also, is really valuable. And using diluting language or depleting language that works against that. I believe so strongly one of the greatest or most significant drivers of a person's performance is their self-confidence. And you know yourself, when you are most confident, how do you perform? You look back on your life, that's when you've been exceptional, when you get that your high level of self-confidence. Now, yes, going with that, you also need the capability, the competence, if you will. But if a manager, it's critical we teach our managers, and this is really where HR ought to be involved, is looking at this and learning to teach managers different approaches and address things like when they're inappropriate, because you can have important feedback to give somebody, and how that feedback is delivered is going to make it a plus or a minus. It's going to work for or against effective change for that individual. And so, pretty critical point. Absolutely.
Need to welcome another member to the group today, Gabe. I suspect I am giving that a Southern twist. I suspect it's might be a little different, Gabe. If I'm mispronouncing your name, please let me know. And then we've got some comments and or question from our audience. Let's see here. So Sharon comments, I agree with you, Virg. I don't believe that managers should wait until the last minute to tell an employee whatever problems the employee may have. I think feedback should be ongoing. Now for Anton, you're right as well, depending on the manager. So Sharon's given support there. And then let me go on to share with her some of her corporate experience. When I worked at AT&T as a manager, it taught us how to give negative feedback in a positive manner. If a manager approaches an employee with negative approach, the employee will have a negative attitude and it's not going to work.
Yeah, so I very much agree with all those comments, very much so. And I think just to add to that, one of the things I've tried to do in working with managers and HR people to teach managers is to always think about when you're going to give feedback. First of all, think about what's the purpose of that feedback? What are you going to do? What are you attempting to do? Is it to beat them up? Is it to hurt those people, be demeaning? Or is it to help them learn and grow and develop and change? So having the right mindset about that then can help you develop the language that you use. And so people, yes, they don't do things always right. Things need to be changed. Sometimes they're very serious, other times less so. But adding an emotional element to that and language that's inappropriate, i.e., hurtful language, works against the person getting the understanding necessary to change. So her point about teaching how to give negative, if you will, things that need to change in a positive way, I agree with that. I would only expand on it to say to give it in a supportive way. So it's positive, but it's supportive. It's still keeping that trusting. Over time, that manager needs to be building that trusting relationship with their employee. When you have a trusting relationship, you think about your own experiences, that's when it's most powerful. And when you don't have a trusting relationship, it makes it difficult. So, and frankly, I believe pretty strongly, it's up to the manager to be in charge of making that work. Now, over time, you want the employee has to take the ownership for actually performing, and the manager's there in effect to enable that. But that manager has to step up to the plate and be responsible.
And Virg, I think you hit on a key piece, and this is something that is what drives a lot of what we do in this culture. and we refer to it as organizational ecosystem. And if you don't have some of the right cultural pieces in place, such as trust, it makes it more difficult to be able to do what you're talking about, and the ongoing feedback and keeping it constructive and all of that. So yeah, that's definitely an important piece.
The thing I remember you teaching Virg too about feedback that really changed my mind about it. Normally, when we think of the words feedback, we think negative. We think somebody did something wrong and now they're getting feedback. But I think mentioning culture, a culture of catching them doing something right versus trying to
Mhm.
focus on catching them doing something wrong is what's so important. Because if all the employee knows is my manager's coming to talk to me, run for the hills. Even if it's frequent, it still can be like that. But what did you used to say, like 80-20 positive to negative feedback?
Yeah, if you remember, I had that slide with that head, a guy with two heads, and one head showed the positive and the other was the negative. And I asked the question, what do you think in the workplace is the amount of broken in percentage of positive versus negative feedback? What happens typically? Well, I have no idea how this data is gathered, but there's a lot of surveys, etc., that have affirmed that on average about 85% of feedback that managers give to people is on the negative side, and only 15% on the positive side. Part of my goal is to greatly shift that. I mean, we got to get down to at least 50-50. I mean, come on, it's crazy at 85-15, but that's pretty typical. And in my experience, that's also what I consistently see. Now, obviously, in the workplace, their managers are interested in getting performance, in assuring things are done well. So that tends to be where their main focus is. But as Anton says, my goodness, there's no reason ever not to also give consistently positive feedback when it's appropriate. You don't want to give artificial,
Mm.
and you don't want to do it in just a general way, like, well, Anton, you're doing a great job. Well, that may feel good, but it doesn't mean a lot. Make your feedback more specific.
Mm.
And a manager has to shift many times their approach, especially those long-term managers that are so geared to do it the other way. It takes some work.
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead,
we
Kev.
talk about them as being manager only. One of the shifts that we've been working to try to accomplish is go from manager only to manager leader, and the mindset and the behavior shift. And then Zaid raises a point that emotional intelligence is an important element in the skills of any person, but especially managers. And that's what we've been referring to, is having emotional intelligence.
Yes, yes, and I will comment on that, having quite a bit of background on emotional intelligence, and that is many times when you hear emotional intelligence, the tendency is to just think of it as behavioral uh, lack of control or strong control, one or the other. But emotional intelligence is much more than that.
Mm.
If you do studies on this, most all the models around emotional intelligence have somewhere around 20 to 26 specific competencies that build. So emotional intelligence is a lot more than that. But for a manager, it boils down to some of the critical pieces of it is behavioral self-control, language control, use of the right language, being smart about the words you select. Words are very powerful.
Mm.
And it's what I did a lot of work on conversational intelligence, and it's amazing. The studies have shown, neuroscience shows that certain words actually trigger chemicals in your mind that in your body that have a negative or a positive impact on you. And so it's really pretty critical to be emotionally intelligent, if you will, as you're stating, to be an effective manager. And in some cases, it takes some work.
Yeah.
Some
And
real work.
then Suzette comments, some based on some of her experience, knowing how to give feedback is critical. She says she's still growing in that area because self-awareness, empathy, and compassion is critical. And hear in order for staffers to regard the feedback. Yeah. Context for delivery, as well as how we deliver, all of that.
You know, there's go ahead, Richard.
No, I was just going to say on context, it's very important, like timing, for example. Now, I've talked about with your soccer example, in the moment feedback, very important. But let's say an employee, has just had an emotional day or some incident, or they just found out they've got a family health issue or something. And yet the manager is compelled before that person leaves today to give them some critical feedback on something that's pretty negative. Well, that's stupid, very candidly. That manager needs to be astute about the timing of when giving feedback will have the most productive effect.
Know your people.
Absolutely. But that comment also made me think about there's the other side that people don't talk about feedback, where it's ineffective because they just try to soften it up way too much, right? They're not delivering exactly what needs to be said. They're doing this crap sandwich thing that people keep advocating for. And, I'm like, what did you actually just say? You said so much, but nothing, because you're so concerned protecting my feelings and not treating me like an adult. You watered everything down, and I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing.
Absolutely. And I'll take just a minute, because this is one of my favorite subjects to beat up a little bit, and that is the sandwich approach to feedback. And actually, consultants and others have taught this in the past, that the best approach for giving feedback is you tell someone something very positive, you then tell them what the negative is, and then you leave with a positive comment, something positive. I'm not an advocate of that, because almost every time it confuses the individual. And secondly, the manager delivering it almost always places the greatest emphasis on the two outside pieces. The positives barely touches on, certainly not in a constructive or meaningful way, the insert, if you will, about what needs to change. And the person, it is of no value. So don't do that. Don't do the sandwich approach. The other thing that ties to that is, don't give positive feedback with a negative qualifier, which is, Antony did a great job on that presentation, but if you could just, and what you're going to remember is but if you could just, no, give them the feedback on that. If there's some change that needs to take place, have a separate conversation on that.
Do you think it's a fair perspective, the sandwich approach? Because I understand, and it's something that in training environments, sometimes that we have to consider how to deal with inappropriate comments, things like that, in a training or class setting. But in a work environment, would it be fair to say the positive part of the sandwich is your culture, so that you're not, when you deliver, as we talked about before, radically candid feedback, it's in a culture of, our folks know that they're valued, that they're cared about, and all that. So you don't have to necessarily give that part of it. You already have established that as the norm. So when you offer something that might be a little hard to hear, they have the backdrop. Hey, I know that my leader cares about me, and they really got my best interest in mind. So when they tell me this, I'm not devastated by it. And so it's a kind of a different thought process on the sandwich approach, if you will.
Well, it is, and I think really it boils down to this whole thing. It is, and it doesn't happen instantly. It is creating a culture of trust. It's creating a culture. It's a developmental culture, and then employees know that. They know their manager has their best interest at heart to help them change and improve. If you're moving into an immediate culture that has not had that, you're going to have a period of transition till you get it to that point. So how that is managed initially is not always so easy.
Yeah. Welcome aboard, Gladstone. Glad to have you here with us today. And also Chris and Manmeet. All some returning participants. And let's see here. Now, this is going to be
before you pop up a comment, Kev. I just want to say, leaders, ask yourself, do I actually believe in this person? Like, I think when before we start giving feedback, if you don't answer yes, you probably shouldn't be their leader, or you did something wrong along the way. But I think that's where that all has to start. If you truly believe in that person and you think that they're a great person, they can grow through whatever the struggles there are, when you deliver that, radical candor, that kind of maybe sometimes even harsh feedback, do it in a somewhat positive way. But even if it's not perfect, if you come from a place of belief, they're going to probably take it the right way. And that's why you hear terms like, I didn't want to disappoint you, right? That's usually, if you're a leader that believes in their team a lot, you're going to hear those words a lot because they feel that belief. Just like, a parent believes in their kids, they feel the same level of belief from you.
Yeah.
It's that trust, or what I refer to as a secure environment, that we can present that in. So let's see. Lee makes a comment. He says, a lot of managers are uncomfortable giving criticism, so they will avoid it, hoping others do it. Yeah, we see that. Teachers will pass students that haven't acquired the knowledge or skills. Oh, yeah. Unfortunately, I've witnessed that firsthand. And that setting that by passing them along, set up for failure. And that we even graduate students that really haven't earned and learned what they need to be successful.
Yeah, it's a world we're in, and the best that we can do is make some of these changes we're talking about, take a different approach to try to make some difference there.
Suzette makes a comment, says that I also believe that agile structures require assessment by staff of their managers or supervisors, and that may not be favored because it flips the switch. Another reason to maintain traditional or keep status quo.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Zaid makes a comment, says, I agree with Virg. It's very important for people to hear the positive, also to build their confidence. Not only, well, that's part of your job, and just deal with it. Again, the idea being culture's already established that relationship, so that we can then in the moment use radical candor to tell people what needs to be heard, including one of the things about radical candor is that Virgin mentioned earlier, don't just throw out vagaries. Get down, nail it very specifically. This was what was wrong. This is what we expect to happen, and here's how we expect to get there.
Well, and if I could, Kevin, I think sometimes as a manager also it's important not only, as you were stating, but people want to know why. And so to help them as a manager working with someone and you're giving them guidance on how to approach something differently, even though that's kind of the established approach by the company, people want to know why. And so part of the job of a manager many times is to help them see that why.
Because that adds respect into the conversation. You've shown them the respect to say, well, you're not just expect to do this because I said so, but here's why we do that. Good one. Anton, you had a comment?
No, I just adding on to that, and whenever possible, tying that why to their personal values, to their personal vision, like that's always going to be the best. It's not always possible. Sometimes the why is to do with other people and customers and teams, but this is where there's another comment made by Gladstone talking about managers must do their homework, right? It becomes, there's a lot on the manager these days, and unfortunately, Agile Performance System does put more on a manager. They have to be more skilled. They have to know their employees. They have to have relationships with their employees. But there's no more important job than that, right? And it's that non-tangible that people still don't understand. It's like the soft skills thing. It took forever for society to realize soft skills are not just something nice to have. It's the way of the future. But you didn't have necessarily a direct ROI of saying, okay, if we invest this much time into managers to develop better soft skills, we're going to get X amount of dollars back. Tough to calculate. Well, similar thing with some of these things that managers must learn now. They're tough to calculate, and companies just have to truly accept that this is the way of the future. And if we're going to manage performance well, these managers have to step up and get better, and we have to provide the education for them.
Yeah.
Not sure if I welcomed Chris. If I didn't, I apologize. If I did, you get it twice. So glad to have you, Chris. And then Zaid makes a comment. Know your people comes from building relationships. Definitely. It doesn't mean that you got to wine and dine them, but you got to have some trust and know what's going on with them, including outside of the office. And without that trust, based on that relationship, things won't happen, or won't happen well anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And then let's see here. I'm catching up, gang. Be patient with me. Chris comments, no one remembers what was said before the but. Yeah, it's kind of like when you do say something, then but, you just erased everything. So it's best to leave it out. I think it's important to separate positive and constructive feedback. I think that they need to be, I agree that they need to be appropriate in the moment. And then Chris also had a comment. When you leverage the sandwich technique, people remember what is said first and last. So the takeaway for the employees, they're doing positive things. Yeah. They may walk away going, okay, well, that was nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's see here. And let's see, Manmeat has a comment and says Gallup, being a world leader in employee satisfaction survey, has 7 questions specifically for the supervisor. Believe that is a great tool that will help evolve a leader to grow. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I very much agree with that. I'm familiar with those, the work that Gallup's done over the years. I think it's one of several, but that's in effect a good guideline for a manager or supervisor. I would only suggest that as you learn about that, and don't be dependent only on that, you need to maybe go beyond just those 7 areas and get a little deeper and to build your competence as a manager.
Would it be fair to say that, based on your comment, Virg, that what we're talking about is being intentional as a manager leader in what we do, rather than just plugging in the traditional management formula? Is that a fair statement?
It's more than a fair statement. It's an essential statement. It's a, for a manager and leader. I do, as I think we said in my introduction, I do quite a bit of leadership and executive coaching, and with all the people that in any kind of, across all industries, almost every single, in fact, I would say every single coaching engagement that I have, the people that I'm dealing with are highly competent in their functional and technical areas. For example, I just took on a senior director with Verizon who is over their cybersecurity unit, pretty significant in today's world. He is extremely competent and knows that stuff in so many ways. Where I am working with him is nothing to do with this functional or technical competence, because that's not what I do. I'm helping him in terms of his leadership, his people, his communication skills. It's all about how he's leading and managing his teams, his competence in all those areas. And so oftentimes that's what I see with managers at all levels, is they're very functionally competent. They got promoted because they were probably functionally competent over operations, over supply chain, over whatever it might be. But where they are weaker, and I would rather say less developed, is in how to manage and lead people.
Yeah. You're helping them make the shift from
Yeah.
being a manager only to being a manager leader.
Yes.
Let's see. This is from Suzette. I got 4 people on LinkedIn user on the screen, one screen. So Suzette says, would you say that feedback is not effective because the reasons given to support an unsatisfactory action by employees are based on non-written and undocumented policy and rules?
I'm not sure how to answer that. I would say that's a good question. I would say that's a contributor. Lack of clarity about those.
Yeah.
I don't think it's exclusive to those, but I think that's a it sets up the environment you're working in. If you have so many things undocumented, unwritten, unclear, things have been passed down one to another, it makes it difficult.
Well, how are you going to manage somebody's performance if you don't have clear-cut expectations? I mean, that starts from that, and then that's the foundation that we provide feedback on. It shouldn't go, here's feedback on something you didn't know you were supposed to be doing. Like, oh, great.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, if it's a critical expectation, you don't walk down the hall chatting and say, oh, by the way, need you to do this. That's not effective, clear setting expectations. And I think that's part of what Suzette was kind of referring to.
Yeah.
If it's something that's important, it needs to be communicated, maybe in multiple channels.
Absolutely. And if Anton, you remember this, but in my 13 things I talk about, one of them is no surprises. And that is so critical. And you may have, many of us on the call have experienced this, where you're getting a performance review, and all of a sudden something's highlighted to you that you had no clue was an expectation until that discussion. Well, what impact does that have on you when you hear that? I mean, you didn't know, but now you're being rated on it, if you will. It really is demoralizing. It has a lot of negative impact. It takes away from any good that's said anywhere, something like that. So a manager has a responsibility to assure job clarity and performance expectations, not only at the outset, but on an ongoing basis, because the world is changing. And so if you have a manager that isn't doing that, there probably will be surprises and things won't work so well.
Yeah, I've experienced that personally, where I have even been intentional to understand someone's expectation. And then when it's time to sit down and go over it, all of a sudden you hear this other thing come up and you go, wait a minute, I thought that was not, it might have been an expectation, but wasn't a priority at this point. That's something down the road. And that will take the wind out of your sails so much. And you kind of go at that point, almost leaves you with a feeling of, well, I can't get anything right. So, Lee, thanks for joining us today, and look forward to the clip you're referring to from Gary V. Definitely. So, Suzette makes a comment, says that part of the job description, they say any other duties as may deem necessary. Yes, I as a former teacher, we always moaned about that, because the way it showed up is, we're hired as teachers, but oh, by the way, you've got to do concession duty at the Friday night football game, and this, that, and the other that comes under any other duties clause, and that is, that's maddening. Virg, your thoughts?
Well, I would say, yeah, unfortunately, some companies really capitalize on that. I would just say, even in every company will probably have that to some degree. In fact, maybe it's almost a standard in work job descriptions. Even so, you need to have a conversation with your manager. What are those other expectations you have? I mean, if I was the employee, I would push that manager to clarify that, because it's really not fair. It's concerning if you don't have that defined.
Well, and to me, what I've seen, sorry, Anton, is when those are the things that come up that even create value issues, because when someone comes into a job and those undefined parts all of a sudden come up, for example, that I gave as a teacher, okay, part of my values is that on Friday night, that is set aside for family time. Well, the first time it comes up, I'm going, wait a minute, you're asking me to violate my values to fill this other duties clause. That's a real problem. And I think that what you said, Virg, get clarity on it. If you see that clause as part of your contract, say, okay, tell me more about this.
Yeah.
It makes me, I'm a visual person. Kev knows that. I always come up with like things in my head to make myself remember things. And I'm just thinking about a minefield, having an employee navigate a minefield without providing him instructions on where we place the mines. Like, and with the minefield, yes, the mines are a problem, but there's also land navigation. There's also natural obstacles and different things like that. And some are more severe than others. And having people understand that is what it's about. Because can you imagine an employee always walking on a minefield without knowing where the mines are? Just the feeling in itself, how uncomfortable that is and how scary that is. That's what it's like working in a job when they don't understand clear-cut expectations.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see here. Gladstone makes a comment, says it's important to differentiate individual contribution to team performance based on desired values, mindsets, and attitudes. Yeah. In fact, I'll throw this out. It just popped into my head, and I know that can be dangerous to pursue, but we'll try it. Performance evaluation for, we talk about individual, but what about teams?
You'd like me to comment on that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay. So in today's world, as we know, more and more emphasis on teams really evolved. Many companies are much more proactive to utilize teams in so many different ways. So a manager's ability to manage individuals and to manage teams is critical. And so there's some unique aspects of that. There is individual performance within that team and maybe outside of that team. And then there is the team performance. And how do you most effectively set those expectations and manage that? I would just say I don't have a simple formula, but every manager needs to pay close attention to that. And just like you're dealing with an individual, you meet with that team leader and the team, and you're clear on what those expectations are of the team and how that's going to be measured and tracked and all of that, because it is a contributor to effectiveness overall and to the results. So a manager's got a responsibility there. And I think it does take additional work, but it's a critical part of being a manager.
Yeah. Anton, thoughts?
No, it just makes me think we had this conversation or similar to it when we were talking about using individual performance as an incentive or as a benchmark to incentivize people to work from home or not. Well, what was important there is I was like, you're leaving out team performance. Somebody can be doing fine individually. They're working from home, all is great. But if that's impacting the team in a negative way and it's causing problems and people have to jump through hoops to make things happen, we can't not look at that. It has to be a balanced scorecard, and we have to look at it all together.
And I've seen more of this in the COVID Zoom time of where there's been breakdowns because teams are still many times adapting to how to work more effectively. But again, it's something the manager's got to get proficient at doing that.
Yeah, and one of the things I know that's a favorite tool of manager onlys is the shotgun approach to everything about performance as a team or individual. And I think Gladstone's comment about the differentiation is important, because there are times that the feedback or criticism should never be directed at the whole team, that it should be laser focused on the team member that is the issue. But I know what I observe in the workforce right now, in especially large corporate environment, the go-to way to deal with a problem is to do the shotgun approach and blast everybody. And you leave people that are doing good job. They're going, wait, what did I do?
And that just kills those individuals that are good performers, that are growing and developing. I mean, managers got to get smart about how to do that, quite frankly.
Yeah. Sharon shares a comment. She says, it's very negative. It has a very negative impact on the employee. I've had it happen myself a long time ago, and it didn't go over too well. Expectations should be clear enough that the employee understands what is expected of them.
Absolutely.
And I think that you mentioned early on, part of the issue is communication. You can't be a Agile Performance Manager without effective communication. And as I teach leaders, I suggest that in addition to any leadership training, they need to seek out and learn about effective communication either on their own, reading, learning, or even get a communication coach.
Well, yes, I'd advocate for that, but I would also say every manager and leader, that needs to be a core competency, is their communications. And so it's if you're working with a leader or a manager, as I do and we all do, I cannot do that effectively if I don't help that leader and manager become better in their communication. Not so easy to do, I will say that sometimes, but that is a critical element to be a competent leader and manager in today's world. If you don't have that strong communication base, it's going to work against you.
Yeah, Anton and I share military background, and one of the things I teach leaders, and it's just a relatively simple tool, but it is one that when people use it, they come back and go, wow, that is valuable, is brief back. We use it in the military. We get briefed on an assignment, a mission, and then a good leader will say, okay, brief me back. And that way if they don't tell you what you just told them, there is a communication breakdown, and it is just such an effective tool.
Absolutely. I call it debrief, and the military many times calls it after action and all that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay. What other
topics? Virg, we're winding down, so I want to give you a few minutes to kind of summarize or give your thoughts. Welcome, Hiram. Glad you're here for the last few minutes. So, Virg, if you want to kind of
I'm going to do two things if I
can.
Okay. Two things. One, we did not talk specifically about, I'll just briefly touch on, is dealing with performance problems. And there's all kinds of variances that, but when it boils down to my guidance to managers and leaders is look at two areas: capability and willingness. Usually that is where performance breaks down. You might have someone who's very capable, but they don't have the willingness to go along with it. They may be very willing, but they're lacking in the capability or the competence. In that case, it's easier to develop their competence probably. But if a manager, oftentimes they get confused with all the stuff going on around a performance problem. They need to focus, and those two areas usually will show up. Sometimes it's impacted also by lack of resources, but usually it's around competence and capability and willingness. So just leave that. In terms of overall kind of summary, this is a challenging area, managing performance. It's not going away. For companies, business, organizations to be effective, managers and leaders must increase their competence and be willing also to lead and manage people effectively. And there's many things I know can be done to help them be better. So it's got to be, as you suggest, Kevin, earlier, intentional. And I just say I urge managers and leaders to build their competence to be effective in managing performance, because ultimately that's the bottom line result. Whether you're in a nonprofit or a for-profit, whatever kind of business, it's all about the ultimate results. And being effective in doing that with the workforce that you have is pretty critical. So, and then finally, I'll say, if anyone that's on the call or at any point, I don't know if you have my contact information, I'd be more than willing to talk with you individually or help you if I could.
Is your Gmail a good email?
Is.
Okay,
Yes.
I'll just drop it in the comments right now, folks. Here's Virg's email. If you guys want to reach out to him for coaching, advice, those kind of things, do reach out. I do all the time.
And if you look at the event on LinkedIn, we've got Virg's profile listed, so you can check there, or just search in LinkedIn Virg Setzer. That's what I did and came up very readily. And Hiram makes a great comment that about communication. we talk about this and it almost gets in a place that especially older generation folks like myself start getting a little uncomfortable, but love language is part of that communication tool. Understand how people pick up on appreciation, because how I share appreciation may not be the way they
Right.
receive it. You ever encountered that, Virg?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's about being sensitive to every person you're dealing with and learning about them. And it's not always so easy, but that's what it boils down to, so that you ultimately can be a better communicator. I always say, learn to speak into their listening, to be able to communicate to where they're receptive to what you're saying and what you're hearing from them.
All right. Thank you, Virg. I appreciate you joining us today. Anton had bragged on you, and he didn't brag enough. I appreciate you bringing your expertise. And folks, we are here for you guys. What we're about primarily is the human SOS movement, and getting everyone engaged to influence the workplace and our lives to bring human view of things again, especially in the business world, because the more we go forward with technology, it's harder and harder to keep the human element considered. And we're available. You can reach out to Virg if you have questions or looking for someone to come in. And if for some reason you can't find it otherwise, DM me or Anton. We'll help you get in touch. Also, go to our website. Just a reminder, we've got a free stress assessment on the website. Love to see you go and use that and refer others to use it. We will, if you have your team go use the stress assessment and you let us know, we will even do an interpretation for your team free. And so take advantage of that. And of course, the Prospective Force team, we're here ready. Any organization that wants to look into becoming more humanly sustainable in their way they operate, we're here for you. Anton, final comments, thoughts?
Nope. Thanks, Virg. Appreciate your time as always. I learned so much from hanging out with you. So thank you for taking the time to hang out with us and our audience.
It was my pleasure. I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
We'll be back next week, everyone, Tuesday morning, 8:00 a.m. Watch for the announcement. Even if you don't see the announcement, you can go to my profile on about that time and look at posts, and you will see us pop up there, and love to have you join us. Thanks for the comments and engagement today. All of you participating, y'all make such a difference as well. Thanks so much. God bless. Have a great week going forward. Thanks, everyone. Bye.